just taken back for a moment. I had to take a deep breath, and I was really confused because I'm thinking this is 2000 in Houston, Texas. And I'm still experiencing people doing stuff that my parents spoke of.
There is no aspect of Black life in the United States that is not touched by racism. That truth is more evident in the workplace. Whether you work in nonprofit, a university, or you are a domestic worker, or you work in corporate America, you will be touched by racism. You will be expected to be perfect at all times, code switch, represent your entire race, never complain about being underestimated, and above all, ignore all racist slights. This is what many Black people have to deal with in order to survive and pay their bills. Work is already stressful. Imagine working while Black.
Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. Just remember, this story, it needs to be told, because that's the only way we're going to be able to change these things, is to address it and so forth. So that's the whole reason why we're doing this. Deep breath.
And audio Dr. 2, roll.
Camera 3 rolling. Action.
There is one word that many of the participants use while describing the racism that they have endured at work, and that word is microaggression. Merriam-Webster defines microaggression as a comment or action that subtly and often unconsciously expresses a prejudice or attitude toward a member of the group. That is the dictionary definition. But the Black definition is that thing you feel in your body when a white person says and does something that registers on your racist radar, but the volume of the incident is not loud enough, and therefore our first instinct is to say it is not racist.
I was working in Equatorial Guinea, in Africa, in 2016. It was my first time going to Africa, and the company was paying quite a bit of money, about $700 a day, which was at the time more money than I had ever made in my career. I didn't know much about the company. We did most of the paperwork and stuff online. It was through emails, did a little bit of training. They put us on a plane, and we had to catch a bus to the job site. So I went out there with about 4 guys that I knew. One was my brother, 3 of them was friends of mine. Most of the rest of the guys were all white, and they showed up, a lot of them had Confederate flags on their shirts or just Confederate flag paraphernalia. So the first thing they did when we got off the plane was start to insult the people of Africa, talk about how they smell, how they look, just complain every step of the way about being in Africa. So we get on the vans, we riding through the city, going to the work site. Guys are saying stuff like, oh man, look how God blessed us to be in America. We don't have to live in this shit. And, calling the place a shithole and all this type of stuff. So I get tired of being an angry Black guy at work. So I'm trying to chill, let me not say nothing this time, because I'm usually always the one to speak up on such issues, and it's usually to my detriment. We get to the camp, we go through the processing. We were the only Black guys on our shift. So I'm very skilled at what I do. Like I said, I've been doing it 14 years. I know what I'm doing. I'm good at what I do. So I don't have a problem doing any of the assignments that they would have us do. So the situation out here was, this is this little small town company that landed this job out here in Africa. And it was actually their first time working in the plants. Every time we travel into the plant, we hearing this stuff about these guys are making fun of the AIDS rate, and they saying things about Africans having AIDS, and they having big laughs about, just all the destruction, or anything negative they could find taking place in this country. So one day I said, hey, how about we do this, guys? How about we just keep the conversations light and respectful, because some of us don't want to hear that. That suggestion was ignored, and they went on to continue to talk a lot of talk a lot of shit about the people of the country. So one day when we got back on the bus, I said, hey man, did y'all know that white men are leading in suicide rates? Like, you know, you motherfuckers killing y'all selves every day, man. Like, y'all the softest motherfuckers on the planet. And one white guy, hey man, suicide is not a joke. You know, my dad committed suicide. So I said, but yeah, you know, AIDS and, you know, people die from AIDS over here. That's a joke. Like, you know, y'all joking about that shit. So, you know, fuck it. Since we making light about so-called serious situations, let me talk about y'all's situation. After that, now they needed to have a meeting. So they decided to pull me in the office and like, hey, what's your problem and this and that. So I told the guy, hey, I know how this shit go, man. Like, I know how this goes. Number one, I don't have a problem. I said, if it's just casual conversation for us to make fun of serious issues, then that's what we're gonna do, because when I tried to talk to y'all about not doing such things, my request went ignored. They told us not to do these things again and this and that. I went back to work the next day. Now, usually how it goes, like we have to complete these assignments in a certain amount of time. If they tell us that we have to be out here for 2 months, it can last a little bit longer, a little bit shorter, but usually they keep the best hands around to stay on longer. So we were working with these 2 white guys in particular, and 2 of the main ones that talked a lot of the stuff about Africa, and they happen to be, you know, real cool with upper management guys. So we were working on this valve, and we had to use the crane to take it out. Well, these 2 white guys were up there doing it, and they couldn't figure out how to do it. So me and one of the guys I came with, the black guy, we went up there and we finished it in about 30 minutes, where it took them about 3 hours and couldn't figure it out. So when we came down, one of the white guys said to me, yeah, next time we'll show you niggas how to do that. It took y'all 3 hours to do that bullshit. Obviously, we the more skilled workers. So, you know, I let them know how I felt about it. They decided to have another meeting with me and not the other guys. So next thing you know, me and my friend get laid off. The guys with less skills end up staying the longest and making the most money. Like we didn't start any of those conversations. We didn't say anything about America or white people initially or none of that shit. But what they do is they say a lot of things, a lot of disrespectful things about black people, our people, and to us, about us, and it gets overlooked as just regular conversation. But if we respond, then, you know, we get treated like we're the ones that caused the issue. So that's pretty much the narrative. Like most of the time, it's usually white guys talking shit like that, and black guys end up losing money because we respond to it. And the ones that don't respond, they'll keep them around a little bit longer as long as they shut the fuck up. But, you know, I've never been one to shut the fuck up and never will, so fuck them. That's my story.
Right out of high school, I decided to go get my barber's license and open up a barbershop and cut hair. After 12 and a half years of doing that, I decided to sell my shop at 30, 31 years old. And I had never worked in, I guess, a normal work environment with different races other than black, because I only cut black people's hair. I decided to buy some 18-wheelers and contract them out in the oil field. Once I got out in the oil field, I discovered that the rest of the world was very racist as far as work environments are concerned. I mean, and it's blatant, it's in your face. Confederate flags everywhere. I mean, actually saying to you, nigga, why you out here? I've even had them go so far as to cut the airlines on my truck. And anybody that knows an 18-wheeler, the brakes, everything on the truck is run by it. I mean, it works off of air compression. And so I had them take off brake chambers, cut airlines, just so I wouldn't be out there making the same type of money that they were making. And, you know, I had never experienced anything like that in my life. I mean, I really don't know how everybody else views it and how they dealt with it. You know, I've seen guys out there, you know, getting the fights. I never got in any fights or anything. As years went on, I just learned to deal with it. It was actually harder for me to deal with because I was raised by a white woman. I mean, in my home, we never had any type of, racial issues, ever. So once I really, got out in the normal workforce and started dealing with other races, I mean, it was really a rude awakening for me. I'm actually glad that I did have my stepmother that instills certain values in me to not ever look at race. I probably have a different view and outlook on, on white people because of my stepmother, but I still deal with the same struggles as every other black person.
This lack of racial literacy makes black people like Edgar particularly vulnerable because when racism does happen to this kind of black person, their sense of reality and safety is threatened in a way that seems more devastating because they were not adequately prepared for how racist the world is.
When I started teaching 11th grade, for many of my students, I was their first Black English teacher. For even more of them, I was their first lady teacher at all. The experience was pretty interesting because the first week of school, before we did any sort of academic work, I heard a lot of comments from students in my classroom that they wished that they had the good teacher. Why did they get me as a teacher? I also would do things like wrap my hair, and it was either a show, as in like I had to answer questions from students. Why do you have that on your hair? What is it? How do you do it? Or some kids just blatantly made fun of it. Whenever I would try to like educate them or reprimand them, I would get a lot of pushback from my bosses as to like, why is my tone like that? And why am I talking like that to students? And so that's what began the relationship of me and my boss and like several microaggressions that were to follow. Each and every time I would try to get on my students, I was tone checked either in a overt way or a covert way. She would say things like, that I could be a little bit more gentler with the students, or that like if I wasn't ready on time, then my students would lose trust in me. And that's the reason why they behave like that. So I would make all the adjustments that she asked me to make, but it still was never enough. And there were still so many excuses as to why I was being treated that way. Like none of it was ever addressed with the students. So I teach 97% Latino students. My first year teaching, I had only one Black student that was a girl and one Black student that was a boy. And they were one of maybe 5 Black students in the whole entire grade. This year as a teacher, I teach no Black students, and we have 4 Black students in the entire grade. I think it was just a culture shock for my coworkers who had very few Black coworkers before I came there. The microaggression started to get a little bit more severe when I would tell her things that I was struggling with and ask for help. And instead of helping me, she would use it against me and say that it was because I wasn't doing the right things. And so I worked harder to like teach better, to articulate better, to know more things, to just be a better teacher, but nothing was ever enough. So if I would tell her something, then it would show up in my evaluations. And so I started to feel like super marginalized. Every time I would ask about my scores and my ratings, which dictated how much I got paid, she would say, oh, don't worry about it. You're just worried about the classroom. You're worried about all the right things. So when it came time to be evaluated, I was taken out of the classroom and replaced by someone who was not as good of a teacher as I was, who did not have the experience that I had, who hadn't had the numbers previously to what I had. And I was told that maybe that teaching wasn't for me, and I was put into special education. I think that sometimes people think that being marginalized is like this abstract concept, but I think that being on the margins is also like a physical state of being as well. I would hide in like some sort of office or just away from everyone else so people wouldn't see me cry or people wouldn't see me upset about all the things that I was experiencing. But come to find out, a lot of us were experiencing the same thing. And I think that that was by design. They kept us away from each other so that we wouldn't share our stories. And I found out all the teachers that were Black in the high school were all being treated the same way. None of us shared our stories and none of us told each other. And so it was then that I decided that I needed to speak up and head the conversation as to what our experiences were and why we had been treated that way. At that point, that's when we started to ask questions to each other and wonder like, why are we being treated? And we started to see that we all had the same management and all our stories were pretty much similar. So we would meet together as Black people in happy hours and sort of tell all the horrible things that had happened. I wasn't the only one being called stupid and, just saying that, like, I wasn't the only one being treated bad by my students and by my coworkers. We had teachers being called the N-word and administration did nothing about it. I remember this one experience when I was in the teacher's lounge and I was heating up my food. One of my coworkers came and took my food out of the microwave as it was being heated. And I asked her, why did she take my food out? And she said, I needed to heat my food up real quick, but I'm almost done. And I said, but my food was still heating. And she said, yeah, it'll be just really quick. And so I didn't want to cause a scene because we were in the teacher's lounge, and if you're a teacher, you understand that the teacher's lounge is a place where it's difficult to be because there's so many different personalities and no one wants to stand out or no one wants to be treated badly or seem like they're the bad person. So I was very calm in that situation and waited for her to finish heating her food up. But then she took her girlfriend's food and heated it up as well. And I sat there and I waited. And in that moment, I didn't know what to do. And so I told her that I didn't appreciate it. And I felt like that was inappropriate. And she just said sorry and she walked out. There was nobody that I could bring that situation to. Nobody could necessarily help me about that. I had another teacher told us that, the reason why we didn't have Black administration is because we need to hire the most qualified people. And I asked her, well, is she saying that the Black people that work there aren't qualified? And she didn't have anything to say. So I found myself being the person who led the charge of these conversations. It went from being a situation where I didn't speak up to being asked to speak on behalf of so many Black people who might not have necessarily been having those same experiences. I still work in that place to this day, and I think this year was the year that I decided that I wasn't going to deal with it anymore. After being gaslighted for almost an entire year and, telling my boss about it and not being helped at all, I just determined that it wasn't a place that I needed to work. And I wanted to make sure that I pulled myself out of that situation and started to work somewhere where I felt like I could be appreciated. So that's what I'm going to do next year.
There are several issues at play. We hear her describe experiencing being microaggressed from both her boss and her students, being gaslighted, and she describes what many racial justice educators call lateral violence.
I've been teaching in K-12 education for the last 19 years. Upon entering K-12 education, I worked at a smaller district in Texas. My experience at that district was quite strange, but I continued to move forward. I can tell you when I started teaching, I taught chemistry, physics, and microbiology. I had a mentor that took care of me for the most of the year just to make sure that I was fine. However, it was a district where we weren't the majority, so it was very hard at first getting acclimated to that environment. My mentor at the time took care of me and pretty much showed me the ropes. So I can tell you one day I was just taking care of my own business. I was in the copy room. As I was copying some papers for my class for the next day, I met a teacher. Upon meeting this teacher, he started talking to me and I thought it was just casual conversation. And while I thought it was casual conversation, he then moved to the next portion of the conversation that made me a bit uncomfortable. He said, where are you from? And I said, Houston, I'm local. And he said, oh, okay. He said, where'd you graduate from? And I said, TSU, Texas Southern University. And he said, oh, okay. Well, let me ask you this question. And I just paused for a moment because I thought it was very odd. After I paused, he then proceeded to say, well, what do Texas Southern University graduates tell another college graduates? And I was like, pause for a moment. I was very confused. I didn't understand what he was getting at. So of course I was just like, well, what do they say? Welcome to McDonald's. How may I help you? And at that moment, I realized that I was amongst a group of white people that didn't appreciate who I was or who they thought I was. So after asking that question, I simply walked away and walked back to my classroom, only to find myself doing what I'm doing now, in tears, and just didn't understand how in 2000 was I still dealing with racism, blatant racism. So at that point, I walked over and started talking to a mentor teacher of mine and told her the story. She was a Black female. She wasn't shook. She didn't move much. She didn't think too much of it. And I was confused because I'm thinking, well, I don't know where you've been, but I haven't experienced this most of my life. I haven't walked into places where I was still being ridiculed or picked on or said anything about just for being Black. At that point, she was just like, you're going to be okay. So, hold on. You're going to be okay. And I was just like, that is so disgraceful, so disrespectful. And I didn't understand it. October rolls around. And I heard, grumblings through the faculty lounge that they were having a Halloween party. I didn't think too much of it. I'm not a person that celebrates Halloween big enough to go to a Halloween party, so I didn't ask any questions or anything about it. Well, behold, maybe a couple of days after the party, a few of my colleagues and I were just talking, and I heard some people saying a couple of things about the party. Of course, I was just being nosy and inquisitive at this point. I asked the question. I was like, oh, well, what happened at the party? Why is it such a buzz? At this point, that's when one of my colleagues told me, well, several of our colleagues went as KKK members. So it was really, really hard. It was really hard, and I was just like, I can't believe this. We're still dealing with the same racism that we've dealt with so many years prior to. So at this point, I was really trying to just figure out who were the people, so that way I knew to stay away from them. Because if they were that bold to throw a party and to dress as KKK members, I, of course, didn't want to have many interactions with them because they were hiding who they truly were as we worked together at this school. I've learned just really that no one really cares other than other people that have been through what you've been through about this. Even those individuals are saying, you're going to be okay. Don't worry about it. But at what point do someone say, well, I care enough to change the situation?
For those of us who are HBCU graduates, then you are unfortunately familiar with the anti-Blackness in this story. Many people denigrate and dismiss the education that historical Black colleges and universities afford Black people. The assumption that a HBCU is less than compared to a predominantly white institution is a pervasive narrative in our culture. One very traumatic thing that Denise's story also highlights is that when she was looking for support and kinship with a fellow Black colleague who she shared her story with, Denise was met with what could be perceived as a lack of empathy, which caused her further harm. This is a function of racism.
I went to work at a university, and as I walked around the office space, and generally I dress professional, have always, even as a young child. For some reason, I dressed in suits and heels in 5th and 6th grade, and I got teased a lot, but it was part of my personality and who I was and who I am. I was just one of my, and that identifies multiple marginalized intersecting identities. It's just who I am. And so I would have this gentleman on a regular basis to approach me in the hallway and say, excuse me, but are you lost? And I would always reply, no, thank you, and continue on about my business. And so finally, it just got to the point where I was just like, okay, I'm going to have to address this man, this white male, because he is becoming comfortable trying to make me feel uncomfortable, to the point where I said, when he did approach me in the hallway, not too far from my office, and it's a predominantly white institution, might I add. I was the only African-American tenure track professor. And he said to me, are you lost? And finally I said, well, no, actually I'm not lost. Let me formally introduce myself to you. My name is Dr. Deidre Johnson, and my office is down the hall, not too far from yours. And it sort of took him back. He was sort of surprised, one, that I was a professor, even though I wasn't dressed as a student, I wasn't dressed as a guest or a visitor on campus. He still would not accept the fact that who I was. And it wasn't until another instance where I saw him again, and he continued to approach me and ask me, am I lost? And it was becoming to the point where I think that he thought that was a norm to make me feel uncomfortable, but to make any Black person feel uncomfortable. And I think that was sort of pivotal to me making a decision once again to change spaces. And I am blessed to be able to be afforded the opportunity to exit myself when I feel as though I'm being confronted. I think that it's just something that's become, and part of my research is looking at this system of institutionalized oppression, right? So you're trying to oppress me, and I'm pushing back.
It's almost as if your humanity does not register to the white people in your space. In this instance, Black people in these situations are not individuals. They are simply objects that need to be contained and surveilled at all times.
I began in education about 17 years ago, and I worked at a predominantly white high school, and I was one of maybe 3 teachers on the faculty of about 170-ish teachers. And I was also a girls basketball coach and a girls track coach. And about the 5th or 6th week of school, my basketball girls were coming out of the gym, and I was telling them to wait until the bell rang, and I was standing next to one of the principals, and all the girls were standing there, and she said, well, aren't all the black kids always the best athletes? Like, weren't you the best athlete when you played basketball? And I just kind of looked at her, and I was a brand new teacher and didn't really know what to say, and just kind of said, well, they're all good, and I was a good athlete too. And that really is the beginning of what I would say is a progression of insults and snide comments made to me as a black woman in a predominantly white workplace. But the most prominent, I guess, story would be maybe my 5th year into coaching and teaching. I had a friendship with one of the other few black teachers on campus, and he was a man. Very good friends, and we coached the same kids and all of that. And one day, the principal called me to her office, and she said, you know, you and Coach such and such, y'all are very close friends. You know, I really want you to watch your personal space. And I thought, what does that really mean? And she said, well, you're married and he's married, and this just became a series of every week she called me in. Somebody saw you guys eating at Starbucks. And it was just over and over. And so finally one day I asked her outright. I said, you know, we aren't the only people at this school who have a friendship that are male and female, but we are the only black friendship at this school. And so I'm wondering what the problem is. And she looked at me and she said, well, Ronnie, surely you know that I'm not racist. I mean, when my school was integrated, I sat next to the black girl, so I'm not racist. And also the lady who took care of my family, when she died, we paid for her entire funeral. So I can't be racist. This has nothing to do with race. And that was how she approached me for the rest of the school year. Everything was about what I was doing. It was about my body. It was about my hair. Why was I wearing my hair like that? Why did I have on those tights? Why did I wear these kinds of pants? I work around young men. I really shouldn't be wearing this. And that went on for an entire school year. And about May of that school year, I finally went to HR and I said, you know, this harassment is getting out of control. I feel like I'm working in a place where I can't do my job well, even though I'm doing my job well. I was voted Teacher of the Year regularly, but I felt like I couldn't do my job well. And I went to HR, and HR looked at me and he said, well, you know, you can file a grievance. There's nothing wrong with that. You can do it. And I said, well, I'll be back tomorrow to file my grievance. And when I went back to campus that next day, they had removed the principal. She got a promotion, and she went on to central office. She's still an assistant superintendent now. And when I went back to HR to ask if I could still file that grievance, they said, well, there's really no need to at this point because she's not your principal anymore. She's not your boss. She's not your appraiser. So it's fine. And they just kind of swept it under the rug. And that was sort of the end of it. I guess maybe the only saving grace was that there were plenty of my colleagues who knew what went on. And so I didn't feel ignored in the sense that I was making it up. So plenty of people knew. But from an administrative and a leadership level, my story was basically ignored, and I was told there was no need.
I was the only chef in a higher position. I was the executive sous chef. As a matter of fact, every place I've been the only black person in a high position. And so with that comes a lot of rewards, but also a lot of risks. What I distinctly remember is being judged on my height and the depth of my voice. In the kitchen, you have to speak loud and you have to speak clear and you have to speak firm. But what I thought was me being a leader and being respected and being listened to, it also was a crux for me. When I began to speak loud, my general manager would say that my voice was very intimidating. Now, in the restaurant, I'm known to have a very personable personality. I'm easy to approach, but my general manager always made sure that he would keep my voice in check. His way of saying it is having a friendly environment where people feel comfortable. It made me seem like people didn't feel comfortable around me, seeing as though my voice is loud. So every day I had to continue to watch how loud I speak, watch how loud I talk, and I speak very eloquently. But it was one of the things that, in actuality, it cost me my job. I was on a 30-day probation to continue to have a very more personable personality. I'm always animated when it comes to me literally talking to people or me explaining food, because food is my passion. However, my father-in-law passed away at my home, and I took a leave of absence for 2 days. And the day after I got back from the funeral, there was a write-up waiting on me for the same thing of me being too loud and me having an aggressive voice. And it's one of the things that him and my executive chef noted, that I have a voice. I have a very loud voice, and my voice intimidates other people. And they want me to keep my voice at their minimum. But I was behind a glass wall where no one can hear me. So it was making me very uncomfortable to do my job and to also work in my own passion. I reached out to the corporate side of it, and they also had the backs of their white counterparts. I would constantly get disrespected by the other team members, and the moment they hear me begin to get more excited or to begin to defend myself, they will all look at me to see if I'm gonna raise my voice and see if I'm gonna get loud. But it was one of the things that I could control because I do have a naturally deep voice. It was a couple servers that needed help from me, and I helped them, but it was the general manager that upset the server, and my name was in it when he told the general manager about what made him upset. And since my name was in it, I got called into another meeting for the same reason, thus relinquishing me of my job. That's one of the things I have to face as a black chef, as a black man. And that is my Working While Black story.
He is being policed for being who he is naturally, and his passion for his job is being labeled as aggression. We also hear Kenneth describing how he had to make sure he made others feel safe and comfortable in his presence, even though he was the most in danger of being harshly labeled and terminated. He was seen as someone who could not assimilate into the white cultural norms at his job, which ultimately is what led to his being fired.
Working at a nursing facility, I've ran into an issue where the residents were unhappy with my hair because I have locks. They automatically assumed that my hair was dirty. So they stressed to my supervisors that they did not want me to work at the job because they thought that I was dirty. The whole body was dirty because of my hair. So they saw my hair, and I think my hair was green at the time, which made it even more repulsive to them. So they thought that it was mold and dirty, and trying to explain to them that I colored my hair and that my hair grew naturally like that wasn't getting around to them. So they gave me two options. They said that I can either work in a different department, or I could try to find some way to manage my hair. So talking to my boss, who is a black woman, she tried to convince me to work in a different department. And I explained to her that I got hired for this department, so I wasn't going to leave. And if the residents had an issue with it, I wouldn't work with those particular residents. I would work with whoever else needed my assistance. And we went on ahead and agreed to do that. Eventually, I started wearing my headgear, my headscarves, my head wraps, headbands, ponytail holders, tried to make my hair look a little bit more decent and stylish, but I wasn't going to change my hair. I wasn't going to color my hair back black. I wasn't going to cut my hair. Like, my locks are me. That's a part of who I am, so they're not going anywhere. So doing that, I still hear the side comments of how dirty I am, calling me a man, asking what am I doing here. See, I'm hearing all of this during the time where I'm serving people their meals. And it gets to the point to where it's even more frustrating with your coworkers, and some of them are black, and they they laugh at it, they snicker at it as if it's funny, and then tell me, oh, don't worry about it, they don't really know any better, they're old, so back in their day. At the end of the day, I don't really care. It doesn't really matter to me what era they were born in. It's about respect. If you want me to help you as a healthcare provider and provide the healthcare that you need, is the reason why I'm here, why I'm hired to work at this place, then let me do my job, because my hair does not reflect my work ethic. It's only a reflection of me and who I am and my lifestyle, but it does not reflect how hard I work.
My Working While Black story is when I was 17 years old. I was a tour guide at the Queen Mary, and I did the educational historical tour. At the end of the tour, a gentleman came up to me and he said, "You did a wonderful job. Are you from India?" And I said, "No, I'm black." And he said, "You're Negro?" And he had literally just his face was of disgust. And I said, "No, I'm black." And I just remember not knowing how to respond. He deflected after he said that, saying that he had a neighbor that adopted some Indian girls, and I looked very much like them. Later on during the day, I did bump into the wife again, and she apologized for her husband. He didn't say anything as far as apologies, but she knew that wasn't right.
Because Kiana was good at her job, the white man immediately saw her in his mind as being anything other than African American, because racist thinking cannot fathom that African Americans are talented and worthy.
After I graduated college, I started working as a field organizer for Mayor Bill White when he was running for governor of Texas. They were moving me out to Dallas, and the night before I was to go out there, I got a phone call from my coworkers, who were two males. And I don't know, I guess they were just trying to feel me out. So, it was a brief little conversation, 5 minutes maybe, hang up, cool. So I head out to Dallas the next day. After I dropped off all my stuff, I went to the headquarters in Dallas, and it was like an little strip building. Go inside, and, there's nothing. I don't get a response, no hello. Usually if I go into a place of business, I expect you to say, "Hey, hi, thank you for coming," or whatever. I got nothing. So I had to kind of assert myself and say, "Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm here. I'm here to see the two gentlemen." So one of the guys was like, "Oh my God, thank you so much. Hi, I'm so sorry. We're so busy. We got caught up. I didn't see you. Thank you for coming." The other guy, though, he says, "You're who?" And I say, "Elizabeth. I'm Elizabeth Johnson." And he was like, "Elizabeth Johnson?" And I was like, "That's what I said." And he was like, "Wow, I didn't expect you to look this way." Sir, what do you mean? I said, "Exactly what do you mean by that?" And he said, "Oh, nothing. I figured you'd look a little different." So I just let it go, whatever. They show me, the map of the districts that I'm supposed to be covering, blase, blase. And, throughout the day, I got there maybe 8, 9 o'clock. Throughout the day, I'm not doing anything at all. I'm constantly asking, what am I supposed to be doing? Am I supposed to do anything? Can you show me what I'm supposed to do? It wasn't until about 4 o'clock, the guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, you're supposed to create your events for the week and send them to such and such in Houston. You didn't know that?" No, I didn't know that, because in Houston, that was headquarters, and we already had that stuff set up. So I was like, okay, so now I have to think on my feet. I have to Google, this, I don't know where I'm at. I have to Google these events. But thankfully, because I am quick on my feet, I hurried up and did that. And I was finished maybe by 4:30. It was supposed to be turned in by 4:45. I was done at 4:30. He was still scrambling though. So after I told him, I said, "Hey, I'm done. I just submitted all my events or whatever. Now I just have to, get my volunteers." He goes, "Oh, you're done. See, she already making us look bad." I was kind of fed up at that point. Just the environment that I was coming into just was not conducive to what I thought that I would be coming into. So I had to kind of walk outside. And after I had to talk to my father, because usually My dad always gives me great advice, and he was like, we've always had you kind of sheltered, so this is going to be a kind of a eye-opening thing for you, but there are always going to be people around you, especially those that are white, that are going to think that you are less than just because you are this color, or they are going to constantly kind of talk down on you because they think that you're not as smart as them. So he kind of had to cheer me up because I was very hot, I was very heated, and I just, I had to constantly do it. I constantly had issues with him. He was stealing my volunteers and just doing different things that were kinds of, that was just blatant disrespect. And once I finally snapped, that is when, he kind of got his act together. But that was just an eye-opening event for me, just because that was my very first, I guess, adult job.
This is a classic case of when people assume because you have a name that does not sound ethnic and you speak with a certain diction that you cannot be Black. The assumption here is that the default human position is white until proven otherwise. Once Elizabeth gets to the job, she is immediately underestimated because she is Black and a woman.
My Working While Black story starts back in 2015, where after a series of interesting events, LinkedIn reach outs, job offers, one of which would have led me to work for one of the oldest historic civil rights organizations in the nation. And I instead found myself up in one of the, I would come to find out, whitest corners of the United States, in Seattle, Washington. I'm sitting across the table from two well-dressed white folks who had just showed me around this beautiful, pristine city. And they slid me a piece of paper with a job offer that I just could not refuse. I looked down at the amount. I was like, wow. And I remember looking at the amount for like relocation, and it was like more than one of my first salaries when I started working in the movement. It was an offer that I just couldn't refuse, and so I accepted it. I went on and, being a single man with no kids, no real responsibility, I kind of took that leap and went to Seattle, and things started off, seemed like it was going to be perfect. I found myself in what seemed to be this utopia, this bastion of progress. In the state of Washington, the Black population is under 3.5%. Let me say that again. The Black population in Washington is under 3.5%. So what that means is for every 100 people you see, 3 of them are going to be Black. And so for the first couple of weeks or so, I was enjoying the weather, and everybody seemed so nice, and it was Seattle, or so I thought. So I'll never forget my first day actually on the job. I was working for an international organization, a labor union that shall remain nameless because I don't want to get sued. But no, that's what I did. And I would come to find out that in this statewide organization, I was the only Black male. Let me repeat that. Across the state of Washington, I was the only Black man working there. So if there was someone in Spokane, Washington that was like, I met a guy and he worked for y'all, a Black guy, I can't think of his name. That was Darrell. That's it. I was he. And, at first, you don't really notice something like that. But as time goes on, you start to realize, especially in a place where you're the only Black male, and I think there were 2 Black females, but they were rarely in the office. It was pretty much just me. So I remember I made a joke one time. There was a lady named Gina, and we were in a staff meeting, and she kind of messed up, and I jumped in with the, damn, Gina, and it was like perfect comedic timing, but nobody got it. No one around the table, not only did they not laugh, they didn't get it. And going on now with this, pretty nice salary and this bastion of progress that is Seattle, I started to notice how I was being treated differently. I started to notice how I was their token. Like literally, you know, the president of the organization would invite me to all these different events and all these different lunches and dinners. And in my head, I'm thinking, man, I done really came up. These people really trust me. They're putting me in, you know, in some really important spaces. When in reality, I would come to understand that I was only a token. And then it's like, wait a minute, how did I know that I was a token? Well, I'll tell you how I absolutely knew that I was a token. When there was once a meeting and we were laying out sort of like what the political landscape was going to look like for this organization, what endorsements were going to look like, what the issues were going to be. And although I'm sitting at the table, and I'm not one of those people to like raise my hand for every question, but when I did have suggestions, they were just knocked aside. It was like, Darrell is not here. Darrell is here for show only. And then I started to notice not only were they doing this to me, they were also doing it to the black members of their organization who were paying, you know, in some cases $100 a month to be part of this union. And I remember there was a black woman and she was running for a statewide position and she was a sister. So this was amazing in, you know, the state of Washington for this black woman to be, you know, running for a position and actually make it like past the primary. Most of the black folks that were part of it were really excited. She was kind of like the Barack Obama of Washington. Like this was a black woman that was running for this seat and she actually had a chance. At every opportunity they had, they would sort of pivot away from supporting her. They wouldn't support her the way they supported all their other candidates. Every other candidate that got an endorsement got money, but she didn't. Things started getting like really bad. There was a white guy at work that would make these really inappropriate, like not even borderline racist comments. He would make little comments like, you know, for Black History Month, every month we would have a monthly meeting, but for February, you know, he kind of said, oh, we got to make sure we have some chicken and collard greens for February. And for this man to say this, you know, in the climate that we were in, and for it to be at work, and for me to be the only black person working there, clearly, you know, that was an issue. And, you know, over time, as I said before, things started getting really choppy. And eventually it got to the point where I had to make a decision. I was either gonna continue to shuck and jive and tap dance, or I was gonna have to make a run for it at night. And that is my Working While Black story.
Darrell is all of us who have ever worked in the nonprofit sector for a liberal organization that truly believed it was doing the work. These kinds of organizations look good on paper and have great missions and visions, but their praxis of social justice is always lacking or non-existent. Black people in these positions quickly realize that their bodies are needed in the space to fulfill the task of being a token, but their ideas, inputs, and/or feedback is not welcomed. In many cases, when Black people in these spaces do make a complaint, they are shut down because the organization has no real interest in addressing their internal racist systems.
I was treated like this magical Negro that would resolve all the problems with the minorities. So when someone would call in an issue for discrimination, my store managers could never seem to handle that. They would always fire people without following protocol if they felt like it was no issue until they heard the D word. And then, you know, here comes the young magical Negro to save the day. At one of my particular stores, there was a white manager who I think was just trying to suck up to me. And she talked about how much she just loved one of her black employees until stuff got real with her job, the white manager's job. This black girl was pretty late all the time. And so white manager made the decision to want to fire her. Of course, this white manager does everything on her own, but she had to call me and I asked her why. And her first answer was, well, you know, black women can get angry. You know, her boyfriend has been in and out of jail So you know how they might react. And I pretty much said, nah, I don't. At this point, I was pretty much pissed. I still, to this day, regret the fact that I never asked that young girl, because we actually did have to fire her. She did have to come to the store. She did have to come see me, but she wasn't angry. The first thing that she did when she saw me, she looked me dead in the face and started crying. She knew that she messed up at the job. She knew she couldn't ask for another chance. She even asked me for references, but it was clear that there was so much more behind what was going on. Her boyfriend, who was supposed to be this monster, just sat in the car patiently as this young lady came in and took this separation from her job. When she walked back to the car and closed the door, I looked at that manager like, what the hell was your problem? This is obviously a rational woman, knew this, they were supposed to be terminated. Why the hell are you calling me for that? And that was crazy. Towards the end of me being in that position, I was asked to fire somebody who was unfireable. At that job meant pretty much figure out the way to go about bending the rules or altering the things that you say or shaping them where it looks like a specific employee was failing expectations. Not the perfect person, but something like that just seemed kind of messed up, especially to someone who was a mother. She wasn't the perfect person. The person who asked me to do it had been in multiple lawsuits for being racist, sexist, you name it, still had a job. And I just refused to play the game. The funny thing is that I found myself looking down the same barrel he asked me to shoot at this woman. It's kind of wild. Like, when you look at it, I ended up giving my own people the send-off on my way out. I'm being profiled, but I'm basically being set up in such a way that it's not traceable. How discrimination works these days is people always think it's the N-word flying. It's not always that. It's these little nickel and dime things that add up to make you look like you're inferior or stupid or not doing your job or deviant or angry. I know I'm not the perfect person, but I'm definitely not any of that. But that's what we face every day. But you know what? We do survive. We do better because we're not the labels that we're told we are.
Many Black people find themselves coerced into doing the work of a diversity officer at their job, on top of the actual job they are there to do. Black people are used by their companies to be human shields to protect the bottom line of these companies from discrimination lawsuits. However, the most insidious thing about this common practice is that eventually the Black person doing the company's bidding ends up being the victim of this same racist strategy.
I grew up in a rural town in Georgia and in high school, and I graduated in 2007. But in high school, we had two different formal proms, one of which was aptly named the white prom, which was a more private prom, and we also had the black prom, which was part of the public school itself. And that was probably my big first overt experience of some type of segregation and things like that. But I allowed that to motivate me to want to move up the social ladder so that I may not experience certain things like that. Transitioning to undergrad and also to medical school, even kind of moving up this social ladder, that I still started to experience not so much the overt, persistent things that we deal with in terms of like Black people, but more of the microaggressions in terms of being in a professional or a business setting, how individuals or non-people of color may formally call me by my first name versus, saying Mr. So-and-so, whether I'm in a bank or whatever have you. And this kind of continued to persist even after I graduated from medical school, and I've earned the title of doctor. And similarly, going back into, professional and business settings, while I should be addressed by a doctor or being called Dr. Daywalker, now I'm referred to as Mr. So-and-so. And even kind of to this day, working with a few colleagues, they would much rather butcher my name or have trouble, saying my first name rather than calling me Dr. Daywalker, whether I be on the wards, whether I'm in a clinical setting, and which would be the more respectful or professional thing to do is refer me as Dr. Daywalker. But it just kind of goes to show you that although you kind of work your way up this social ladder, even in places where you should have some type of professional decorum, some individuals still allow their personal bias about one's culture to continue to persist. I don't believe that an MD or any other title may be able to completely buffer you from personal biases. Growing out my hair was a big deal for me. And I'll tell you why that is. Growing up around me, a lot of the individuals that look like me will grow their hair out. But having the ambition that I had, I felt like, or I feel like as a nation, we're a little socially conditioned, if you will, to think that you have to look a certain way to get into certain spaces. And that had always kept me from wanting to actually grow my hair out. So to fast forward to where I am now, once I got into residency after medical school, I decided to grow it out. In a sense, I felt like I had almost arrived, like, hey, I'm this functioning doctor now, so let me grow my hair out, let me feel free, let me be able to live the life that I want to live. And most recently, we had a recruiter come by and discuss, different things to kind of help us be more attractive for employers. And one of the things that she mentioned, and this happens to be, again, a person, a non-person of color, she mentioned that locks specifically may make you less attractive to a potential employer. So it's those things that still definitely exist, and you feel it.
Racism gives white people a posture that allows them to be over-familiar with Black people, meaning they will not address Black people with the proper titles or even ask the Black person how they want to be addressed. It is akin to when during Jim Crow, how all Black people were called girl or boy by whites, irrespective of the Black person's age or social position. Dr. Daywalker is highly credentialed, walks into the room dressed like a doctor, but is mistaken for every other position in the hospital except for the most prestigious position that he actually holds. Although Dr. Daywalker is a physician, how he wears his hair naturally in locks is seen as being an impediment.
I am a victim of sex trafficking. I used to be a stripper, a police officer, a comedian, and today I'm a politician. After I left the strip club, going into law enforcement was difficult for me. I had just served my country for 2 years, active duty, and I was in that position where I was leaving one area of my life behind and going into corporate America. And it was tough for me because I was not prepped properly for those type of positions. And during the interview phase, you have to go through a polygraph exam. And during that phase, I remember specifically before I even hooked up to the machine and got ready to answer those really difficult questions, I remember saying to my examiner, I used to be a stripper. I don't know if that's going to affect me getting this job. I've always been a very honest person, and I did not want those results to affect anything on my screening. So I went ahead and told that truth, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to do this now because I don't want my heart to fluctuate. I don't want to seem like I'm a liability to this company because I told a lie. So once my examiner heard my truth, he looked at me and he said, before we even start, I want you to calm down. And I said, okay. He said, okay, you used to be a stripper. And he reeled me in. It was so easy. I immediately became comfortable with telling him all of my truth because he was personable. He was so personable that he closed the entire polygraph exam down, and then he asked me to take off my clothes to give him a dance. and I did. It was extremely uncomfortable. It was extremely unprofessional, and I did not know how to receive leaving my old lifestyle behind, coming into the workforce and having to expose a truth about myself and then letting it be exploited at the same time. And I just remember thinking to myself, I'm gonna do this, but I'm doing this because I have children. I'm doing this because this is the goal, to leave this lifestyle behind. But I did not know that something in my past that I was honest about and that I had left behind me due to sex trafficking and just a lifestyle that I did not ask for was gonna hunt me for the rest of my life.
For Black women, working while Black sometimes involves sexual harassment and sexual assault. What happened to Nisi should not have happened, but it happened because she lives at the intersection of race, class, and gender, which made her a more vulnerable target in the eyes of patriarchy.
Working as a home health aide for this white man and working in his house. And he was a paraplegic. It was just him and his wife that lived there. She was an English professor. And so she was always be gone during the day. And I would be there for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. And what my job required me to do was to get him out of bed, help him out of bed, and take him to the bathroom, and he showered himself. Afterwards, I would take him and put him back into the bed and give him a back and shoulder massage. During one time I was there, he asked me to do a longer massage for him. And I did, and he told me to go a little bit lower, instead of just on the shoulders, to do his chest too. So I did so, and he actually took his hands and started massaging my breast. He told me not to say anything. He told me not to tell his wife and say this is a part of my job to help relax him. I didn't say anything. I was extremely nervous. I was afraid because I was in his house. Regardless of him being a paraplegic, I still was in his house and I didn't really know what to do. I remember his wife coming, and when his wife came, we didn't hear her, and she walked in, and I had to be the one to take the blame for that. I had to tell her that I allowed him to touch my breast. I was so nervous. I was scared. I was frightened. I did not know what to do. She told me that she was going to tell my job. My job also asked me what happened. I tried to be honest with them and tell them what happened. Of course, they did not believe me. I told them that he forced me to do something that I was not comfortable with doing, that he told me to go lower in his massages. And they told me that if I felt uncomfortable, that I should have called. I should have stopped and I should have called. But I told them that I was very nervous and I was very frightened for my life, actually, because this is my livelihood. Like, this is how I make money, and I worked for myself.
Racist thinking creates the false narrative that Black women cannot be victimized sexually, and therefore she is forced to lie about the assault. But even when she tells the truth, she is not protected by her agency. The power dynamics at play in this story is an important fact that must be taken seriously. The fact that her disabled client stated it was her job to relax him means he felt empowered to abuse her because he was paying her. These are the kinds of Me Too victims who get erased.
It was a long time ago, my Working While Black story, and it had to do with barely 18, having worked in stores and, grunt work. I wanted to be a corporate secretary to get me ready for going to law school. And so it was my second or third year in college. I went to school at 16, and I was excited. My interview was late in the afternoon. And when I walked in, the HR guy, and I still even remember his name, we'll just call him Steve. Steve looked frazzled. and he said, look, I'm just going to be honest with you. We have to hire somebody of color, preferably a black person. And I haven't had any luck all day. And so I'm just going to get straight to the point. What if I told you an off-color or racist joke? I said, will it be funny? And he kind of laughed. And I said, what do you expect me to say about someone telling me an off-color joke? They'll get what they give. And so he hired me. I think he thought I had the best potential, that I wasn't overly sensitive, and that I wasn't somehow, scared of white people, which I wasn't. My daddy always taught me we were smarter than they were. But that said, the very first week of work, I'm the new secretary. Of course, they asked me to make coffee, and of course I made it very badly. They didn't ask that anymore. But that was the week that Roots was playing. And every morning when I came into work, I was subject to the white guys having a conversation about Roots. And this particular morning they said, we really did those Africans a favor in bringing them over here to America, because all they did was eat one another. And I looked up and I said, that's what my mother said white folks did, that you all were the cannibals, and walked out of the room. But it seemed like for about 6 months, I was subject to ridiculous things that, since they weren't being said to me necessarily, I didn't have a right to be angry about it. I didn't have a right to say anything. And a lot of times I didn't. My father always told me, sometimes just keep quiet until you know what you have to do. But the jokes got to me sometimes. One joke in particular was directed at me. And they said, Perry, Remington has come out with a new rifle. They call it the nigger. It don't work, and you can't fire it. And I had had pretty much enough. It was a well-paying job. I was a secretary, but I had had enough. And I knew that it might cost me my job. But I said, it figures that a white person would make something that didn't work, because that seems to be what you do best. But if you tell me one more joke or one more joke around me, this thing that you all were so afraid of who to hire, I'm the wrong black person to have hired, because my father told me that I was better than you think I am. Over time, the subtleness was worse sometimes than the all-out racism, the under the table, or not talking when you walked into a room, I'm better than this. I think the big deal is that we have to own our own companies and not fight this anymore. And that's my Working While Black story.
Being asked to always suppress your feelings and ignore racism to ensure that you are able to pay your bills is an expensive tax that Black people are asked to pay in order to survive inside of capitalism.
Starting at the beginning of my career, fresh out of college, I was treated differently, but not sure why. It was also pointed out to me many times that my hair was distracting, or my clothes, or the way I carried myself was a little different. But at the same time, it was also surprising that I fit in so well. It was surprising that I was able to do my job. It was surprising that I knew how to speak. It was surprising that I carried myself with dignity, and I didn't understand why. I thought it was because I was young. I thought it was because I was new.
excused it in every reason that you can, because who wants to accept the obvious, right? It's because I look different. It's because I'm a brown girl. So I carried that with me, and I kept going because I didn't know what else to do, right? What do? I'm ambitious, I am smart, and I work hard. So I kept going. But the most recent shock that I found in work was that I overheard my coworkers, both Caucasian women, discussing when it was appropriate to use racial slurs. Now, this was not a closed environment. This was a completely open environment. It's an open workplace. There are several of us in the office. I am the only person of color. Yet they had a very casual, very open conversation that started with Chinese people. I don't like it when, people use insert slur here. I don't even know what they are. That's how I don't use them. I believe they said something like, and then they went on to the Mexican slur, and they talked about how they hear it often, and it's funny. It's like, really? Why is this okay? Why is this acceptable? Why is no one saying anything? That was the biggest shock. One, that these women had the audacity to have this conversation in the open, and two, nobody but me in the room seemed to be bothered by it. So even though I was visibly uncomfortable, they continued with their conversation until eventually one of the women got to the N-word. She discussed how it was okay if she used the N-word, if she was singing a rap song. And she gave examples in the workplace about how it was okay to use these words, and that her Black friends had co-signed. They had given her the okay. So it was definitely okay because they said so. The other woman that she was speaking with was actually a mixed woman with a mixed child. So she was engaged to an African-American man. And as I sat there, I thought, this is your daughter that you're talking about. How are you going to have these conversations with your daughter when you are allowing someone else to have this conversation without checking her? So of course it got to the point where I couldn't sit there anymore quietly, and I spoke up. And I told her very directly, it's never okay. Ever. And of course she interjected, and I cut her off. It's not okay. And we need to stop having this conversation right now. And promptly wrote a letter to HR explaining that there are several people in the department that needs to be retrained in the EEOC because this is not okay. This is not acceptable. I am uncomfortable in my working environment, and I will not continue to be so.
These workplaces tend to make Black women's hair a topic of conversation. Jessica describes not wanting to connect the dots that her colleagues being shocked by her professionalism was due to racism, but eventually she had to see it for what it was. Jessica is yet another example of a Black person who, while at work, is subjected to casual racism of her colleagues and ends up being the one who has to say something and report the incident to HR.
I think I want to start from one of the first instances where I experienced a Black story. I was a senior in high school, and that was a long time ago, but several of us were working at a bake sale. It turned out to be that I was the only Black person there. In the area that I was basically the only Black person quite everywhere. I was smart, student council president, all of this stuff. So 3 Black people walked out of the supermarket where we were. One of the young ladies with us, one of the Caucasian ladies, she said, "Ooh, look at those dumb niggers." And everybody gasped. And they said, "Hey, there's Carla right there." She said, "Oh, Carla's not a nigger." And I was like, what the hell? So it made me realize, okay, if you don't see my Blackness, what do you see me as? And I've experienced that so many times in my life. I felt like, and have been told that you're not Black enough to be Black, but you're certainly not white. So what are you? What do people see me as? And that's really, really upsetting to me, because it's like that house nigger syndrome. You know, the niggas that work in the field, hey, you know what they are. They're the niggers. The niggers that work in the house, you know, what are they? Oh, it's supposed to be nice. Oh, you in the house, you got it cushy. You got it going on. But the realness of the matter is worse, because they really don't see you until it's time that you need them to be seen. And then all of a sudden, you're black. There was a time when I was working as a human resources generalist. I was so glad to get the job. I enjoyed it. I came in, they were paying me a reasonably good salary, and I did a good job. I was going in 7 days a week. I was working overtime. I never took a day off. I was just there all the time. And the situation, when I walked into it, everything was messed up. So I spent countless number of hours straightening things out, making sure everything worked fine. My supervisors and the whole department, of course, they were all white. And I'll never forget, it was my birthday along with another one of the ladies' birthdays in the department. And so we all went out to dinner together to celebrate. They made me feel awesome. They bought gifts. It was just really great. There was a new lady there, and I didn't know who she was. And they said, well, she's going to be joining the department. And I said, okay, great. She didn't have the credentials. She didn't have the knowledge. I spent days and weeks training her, trying to get her to understand how to use the systems, what the codes were, what the laws were, all of this. And little did I know that even before the day I came, they had planned that job for her. She knew what the hell she was doing. She wasn't doing a good job. She was lazy. But guess what? As soon as they determined that she had learned enough to marginally do the job to keep from screwing things up, I got a phone call. Carla, your services are no longer needed. And that is my Working While Black story.
I have several Working While Black stories. The two that stick out the most happened when I was working at a Best Buy here in Texas. One situation was when I was attempting to apply to be a supervisor. The manager told me that he saw me as a tasker. And at the time, I didn't really process it and really understand the extent of what he was saying or what he was implying. But over time, as I continued to reflect on it, I realized what he was really saying to me, the limitation that he was putting on me because of his perception on me. What I did when he told me that I was just a tasker, he told me all these things that I didn't know, why I wasn't qualified, the information that I asked me a bunch of questions that I didn't have answers to at the time. So I went and studied. When I went to the interview, I was thoroughly prepared and did well based off the questions that he asked me. And even in the interview, I got a sense that, he wasn't taking me seriously because he had already put a boundary on me himself. And it was frustrating, but it wasn't the end of the world because I didn't want to work at Best Buy for the rest of my life anyway. So, it just was something else that kind of let me know that Best Buy was not the space for me to work in. Then another situation at the same location in Pearland, Texas. One evening, after working all day, moving these boxes because I did the warehouse work, so I have to put the boxes. When you come into the Best Buy, you see the boxes stacked so neatly and pristine. That was my job to do that. So I had been doing that all day, delivering great customer service because that's what I do. And as we were getting ready to go home, closing down the building, I was going into the parking lot. 2 Pearland police officers approached me with my Best Buy t-shirt on as I'm leaving the building while my coworkers are walking out alongside me or going towards their cars, and told me that they were getting reports that someone was breaking into an Old Navy that was being built right next door. And so I in my most well-behaved demeanor, tried to explain to them that, you know, I worked at Best Buy. I reached out to, you know, some of my coworkers, like, hey, you know, guys, can you let them know that I worked there? But they still made me wait while they went through the rigmarole, ID check and all that kind of stuff. And so even to this day, I feel like as a man, I didn't stand up for myself. I didn't do what I could have done. But then at the same time, when you're dealing with racist police and a racist system, you want to make it out the situation. So sometimes I feel like I could have been a little bit more vocal about my position, my rights, and what I felt. But at the same time, I just wanted to go home. I was tired.
Terrence, while leaving work, is stopped and profiled by the police despite wearing a work shirt. Once again, Black people are seen as always being on the verge of criminality. Out of everyone leaving work, why is Terrence the only one stopped and questioned about criminal activity taking place in the neighborhood? Terrence did nothing wrong, but still he has to sit with conflicting feelings about the incident. This is the kind of mental confusion that racism causes in the minds of Black people.
I work for a company, a transportation company. I don't want to quite say the name. Every day I come in, I feel like I'm in a hostage. I'm a hostage in my own job. I overheard a conversation with management. They were explaining their employees and how they wanted them to present themselves to the company. I was number 2 in the company as being a manager at another branch in the country because of my ethnicity. They said I was too urban. To them, basically, urban is too hood for the position. I didn't fit the description of what a company or what a person is supposed to be or what a manager is supposed to be. But at the end of the day, one wrong move that I make can determine my job, my reputation, my dignity. But anything someone else does, it's okay, it's a mistake. It'll be all right. So one day I asked my manager, is there a problem with me? Is there a situation with me? He bluntly told me that you need to change how the way you look, how the way you act, how the way you talk. Every day I want to say what I want to say, but it's like I'm constantly trapped. I've tried other options to get out the situation, but it's like they have a block on every which way I go. If I step left, they're right there to greet me. A lot of times, I just it's so horrible that I just feel that I just want to give up, and I be honest with you. A lot of times, the way I feel is it's like I want to just. I just want to just get it all over with, more or less just commit suicide. That's just how bad it is. It's getting tougher and tougher every day. But of course I have a family that I have to provide. But like I said, it's every day it's like I don't want to do it anymore. I just want to just get it over with. Honestly, I really don't know what to do at this point. Of course I can look for another job, but I get another job, I still have that scar from this job and what I'm currently working. I won't have no type of, hatred toward the company, but it needs to be a change. And I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it. And that is my Working While Black story.
Racism is an embodied experience that gets recorded in your body. The political theorist Arlene Geronimus has coined the term weathering to capture how long-term psychological and physiological exposure to racism leads to chronic health issues, advanced aging, and early death. Black may not crack on the outside, but it is indeed cracking on the inside.
I have a lot of working while Black stories because, I can't rub it off, and I love to work. The one that is probably the most potent in the past few years has been that my sister and I were working in cultural inclusion, seeking to support Houston after Hurricane Harvey. UNICEF is an international agency that helps to make sure that kids are established and feeling safe and that they have their basic needs met. And they came to Houston to do what's called a U report. A U report helps underserved youth identify different things that they might need to feel safe. In Houston, it's particularly complex because we have many underserved kids who are other than white. There's kids who speak Spanish, kids who speak various languages from Asia, as well as kids that speak various languages in any of the African countries. And they're all non-white. We applied for the job to go and to work and to do U Report, which requires some technical components as well as just being in the community. So community engagement is one of the things that we do really well. We were particularly qualified. At the time, the money was pretty good. It was $80,000 for a year-long contract. Because we were post-Hurricane Harvey survivors, it also affected our own community. So when we start to line up these details, it's got, we're a small business, we're Black owned. I'm also Afro-Latina. My father's from Panama. We're bilingual. We speak English and Spanish. We know the community. We're actually known for knowing the community and community members. We're heavily involved with the government here at the city level, the county level, as well as the state. We interviewed with UNICEF, and I called the persons in New York to let them know of our deep interest. Something that they were particularly interested in is that my sister, who is 15 years my junior, actually implemented U Report in Fiji after a cyclone. So the same exact scenario that it happened in Fiji, she had experience doing, and she was now able to bring that specifically to Houston to help to support. UNICEF was impressed. We had a phone interview. We followed up about a month later and found out that they had given the job to a young woman who was white. Half of our qualifications didn't have any of the qualifications at all that Jacoby, my sister, had, and didn't even meet any of the basic qualifications that I had. As a matter of fact, the young white woman didn't even meet the minimum standards for UNICEF's request. This posed a problem because, once again, what these organizations show is that our work is good enough for free. They use all of our standards, all of our processes. We come to Black people, we come to persons of color to find solutions, to implement the solutions. They pay us piddles, and then we turn around or have to buy it back from them. Or they don't hire us at all and use an avatar of our oppressor to actually implement the work. For $80,000 post-hurricane, this was something that our community needed. I'm a mother. I have children in my home. I am a small business. I pay taxes on that business. I'm a homeowner. I needed the capacity to be able to pay my mortgage post-hurricane. My vehicle was repossessed after that. My sister endured a lot of emotional trauma. It affected my capacity to be what I was raised to be, which is a protector. All of these things we're forced to be all the time. And my story is one. The premise here is that UNICEF is supposed to be the agency that is looking out for young children like me, for young children like my sister, who grow up believing these things, believing that there is some white God looking out for us. And we go through all types of processes of enduring debt and studying and working hard and getting up early and perming our hair, doing things that cause us a lot of trauma. Only when nature comes to settle a score, we're still not good enough. These things are exhausting. What made my working while black scenario worse was that I did go to my community. I went to my elected officials who are black, who stated that they would always be here for us, that all we have to do is live with integrity. All we have to do is stand up and do the right thing. And not only did they not come forth to even ask us the scenario, but they ignored us. My story is one like many sisters and brothers who are like me, who are so talented, who are powerful, who are quite beautiful, who have the capacity to dream, who are creative, who are hard workers, who have integrity, who love their communities. And what this has done is forced me to go to a level of such deep, intense refusal to participate. But also, it's forced me to create a new network and push through and no longer deal with correlated activities and responses and move into the causation and the causation only. And for me, in my Black Hispanic-owned business, my causation is about disrupting and breaking this system. I no longer participate with people whose values don't apply with mine, including persons who are Black. I want a new standard. I want a new opportunity to be able to rectify this, and it's happening. And so my whole capacity to work has been reframed into a phoenix, if you will, of something that is very powerful, is self-owned, and independent, but creating a new space for all of us.
For many Black people watching, you may feel validated, affirmed, or even angry. These brave participants told us their truth, which is also our collective truth. The truth is that racism is taxing to Black people. Capitalism in the United States was built on the backs of Black bodies, and in many ways, we are still being harmed in the workplace by this nation's original sin. Racism will gaslight you if you let it. May this film serve as proof that you are not crazy, but racism is.
At this moment, as a scholar and the research that I do, I have now recognized that every woman, every Black woman, by the age of 50, will have experienced some level of discrimination to the point where they will have to seek not just counseling, but legal assistance to either file a EEOC claim or a claim against their employer.
We've all attended the EEOC trainings, right? Where we're taught you don't say certain things, even about your own race. You don't make those jokes. This is inappropriate. This is sexist. This is racist. Just keep it to yourself. And we've had to sit through those trainings, and they're painful because you think, what idiot doesn't know this?
I think the diversity trainings or they're just lackluster. They are just something that we do to hopefully reach maybe 1 or 2 people that may change their mind about how they approach other ethnic groups. But I don't think it's doing much to really change society.
I think that diversity training is something similar to desegregation in the work environment. So it has that same effect where it gives a presentation of something that is positive and inclusive, but at the end of the day, it's just something that teaches you how to further assimilate into a white-led environment or white-led culture.
The front lines of freedom will not be ignored, with leaders out forging a change. You look at me, but you don't see the chronicles of my identity. We have no choice, reclaim our voice, but this time we're singing it loud. To be us is a form of protest. To be us is a matter of strength. To be us is a mark of pride within. To be historians of change. This is the war of those who came before, a bridge from then to now. Let the soldiers of Selma live forevermore. The fight lives on somehow. You look at me, but you don't see the parables of my dawning victory. We have no choice, reclaim our voice, but this time we're singing. To be us is a form of protest. To be us is a matter of strength. To be us is a mark of pride within. To be historians of change. We see you, we feel you, and we carry your story. To know you